Welcome to Books and Brews Light, first episode. These will be shorter episodes than our monthly program, and these will all be available on YouTube. And our first guest, might I say our first guinea pig, is Alani Bankhead. And so I would like you to introduce yourself. You have a very interesting background, and I'm actually a little afraid of saying too much. So
No, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be on here with you and chat about books and brews. I'm a 20 plus year career military officer and supervisory special agent. So I have hunted terrorists and spies and human traffickers. Child sex crimes are actually my specialty. And I was even a senior Pentagon bodyguard to one of the top Pentagon officials. And so, yeah, I've lived and worked all over the world. And my passion now is actually helping people overcome their self-doubt and imposter syndrome, because obviously being 5'3" and looking like I'm 12 and a female is not exactly what you would imagine in those positions. But my mission is to help everybody understand that what you think is your weakness is the key to unlocking your greatest power and greatest joy.
Right. And, you know, I was particularly interested in your comment that you look like you're 12. If you've been in the military for 20 years, you're probably older than you look. And, you know, it can be a blessing and a curse. When I was 29, I think a lot of people thought I was about 17 or 18. And okay, we all want to look younger than we are. But the problem was I was kind of a freelance musician at the time. So I would go and meet these people to play for various orchestra subs things who didn't know me. And I was pregnant. And I was pregnant with my fifth. Now, when you look like you're 17 and you tell someone I'm pregnant with my fifth child, they make some assumptions very quickly.
100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, what have some of your experiences like that been? What are the pros and cons of looking younger?
Yeah. So, I'll just stick with the pros because that's what really stands out to me is, so when I was active duty, my first deployment was actually to Iraq with special operations. So, you know, in movies, when you see people with briefcases of money and they're meeting with their informants in secret and they're exchanging intelligence for money, like that's what I did. Okay. And I had horrible events where people would look at me and be like, who are you? And, you know, even Iraqis would say, you need to be in the kitchen. You shouldn't be out here, like in professional settings. And those are really hard experiences for me. But I also learned that money talks. And so that was a wonderful lesson that even if the initial answer is no, that there's always going to be some button I can push to get the information I need. And so overcoming that barrier gave me a lot of confidence. My parents also let me get into parts of the country that my male, burly, American-looking counterparts could not get into. So I actually got access to threads of intelligence that previously were untapped. When I was a bodyguard, I had the element of surprise working in my favor. And so the schoolhouse, like where the Secret Service goes to learn all that stuff, one of the instructors had called me toward the end of my 2 years at the Pentagon. And he said, you know, we've noticed your team has less use of force incidences compared to the other teams. And the instructor's theory was, when you see a big guy with a vest and an earpiece and a suit on, maybe if you have mental health issues, you might, you know, kind of pony up to him. And when a threat presents, you don't know why. Your only mission is separate that threat from your protectee, right? But for me, since nobody expected me to be the bodyguard, nobody challenged me. And we just didn't have any of those issues that a lot of the other teams had. And so, of course, there were plenty of times when I was younger, I would get upset because people disrespected me or discounted me. But what I found was actually, it was such a big blessing when that happened, because I love people and I love building relationship. And so if you blew me off because of how I looked, but then later discovered what I did or who I was, and now you wanted to build relationship because you thought I could give you something, now I'm not going to work with you because you treated me a certain way. And I don't work with people that don't
Right.
show mutual respect for
And
other
so you learned
folks.
something about them. Now, how
Yes.
did you, I'm especially interested because I grew up in the military. A couple of my sons are in the military. How did you end up in your position? Like, was it
Oh my
something you
gosh.
set out to do?
No, well, it's total accident. So my dad was in the military as well. He was Army, and we spent some time in embassies overseas. And so we were in Colombia when the Pablo Escobar, the height of the drug cartel stuff was happening.
Okay.
And so initially I wanted to do counter drug stuff, but from an intelligence standpoint.
Hmm.
And I actually didn't get into intelligence. I got human resources when I started. I did everything I could to get into the counter drug stuff. Every door was closing in my face. I got tired of the HR. Like, I loved my job, but I was
Hmm.
just ready for a challenge. And I'd had several supervisors kind of telling me over the years that you should be a special agent. You'd make a great special agent. But at the time, I thought being a special agent was like an internal affairs thing, which it's not.
Okay.
And so I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then when I was ready to change jobs, the only available opportunities were flying, medical, which I didn't want to do, and being a special agent. And so I kind of took it as a sign from the universe that maybe this is something I need to do. And then it turned out, in hindsight, 20 years later, I'm so glad I didn't do the counter drug stuff. I'm so glad I didn't, work in regular intelligence. I do counterintelligence when I'm activated. But what I learned about myself is I want to protect the vulnerable, and protecting children from exploitation just weighs more heavily on my heart than narco stuff at this point. But I
And
didn't
thank
know that at the
goodness
time.
someone's doing that. So before we talk about your book, let's see. That's the problem with the green screen. So what I picked for your book, this is actually a mocktail. It's a version, a non-alcoholic version of mojito. And so the reason I picked this is because it's not going to be quite what you might think it would be. So I haven't actually tasted this, and I confess that I don't really like to measure stuff, and I was in a hurry, so I just threw stuff in here. I have no idea if it's even remotely close to the correct amounts, but it is kind of cool because I have a mint plant outside, so I was able to pick our own mints.
I
So
love that. Cheers.
cheers. That's pretty good. So what this is made of, for anyone interested, let me read my instructions. There is a lime in there. I don't know if you can really see it floating in there. Oh, I see. It was supposed to be 1 ounce of honey syrup. There might be a little more. 10 to 15 mint leaves. There are actually about 20 in there. And 4 to 6 ounces of club soda.
Yum.
So that's what this is. And I actually made the honey syrup myself because I don't know if that's like something you can buy, because ironically enough, I'm really not that into beer or cocktails. Speak
Wow.
speak of, just like you were saying, you kind of ended up there without intending to be where you
There
are.
you go.
Right. Here's someone who doesn't even like beer doing books and brews. It's funny how that came about. But so how did you get from being an intelligence agent singular to writing this book about the imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So obviously, I struggled from imposter syndrome for about the first 10 or so years of my career. So, imposter syndrome, for those who don't know, is the belief that you're not good enough or qualified for your job or awards or positive feedback or promotions. And that eventually your coworkers, your bosses are going to figure out that you're this imposter who doesn't deserve these things, and that bad things will happen. So, maybe you lose professional respect or your job, and then horrible things happen, right? And so, I spent so many years suffering from this belief that my physical appearance was a negative. And it wasn't until I realized what a powerful tool it actually was that really things started to open up for me professionally. And I was able to thrive rather than survive, which, when you're in imposter syndrome, you're in survival mode. And
Okay.
there have been over 60 studies since the 1970s on imposter syndrome, and the same basic numbers come up where it's 70% of the population experiences it. And
Wow.
so, right. I mean, it's like almost
That's a lot.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I first learned about it, I was in a unit briefing and I was kind of looking around like, 70% of you are suffering with the same thing that I've had, and we're not talking about this.
Yeah.
And that fear, it keeps you from taking action on the dreams that you have. And what I realized through my own process was, first, when your imposter comes up, it means you're doing something aligned with your life purpose. And so there's going to be something in your brain that says, don't do it so you don't get hurt, because if you fail at your life purpose, what are you going to do? But so the book was just my way of easily getting the information on what I do with my clients and helping them harness their imposter syndrome to work for them.
Okay. So you do this professionally now, counseling people. And was that a natural outcome of writing the book, or how did that come to be? No.
The book came way after I started the business.
Okay.
So what I realized was, in the justice space, so whether it's child exploitation, human trafficking, whatever it might be, a lot of incredible humans that are in the space who want to protect their communities were too scared to put their best gifts forward because the stakes are so high, right? So if I work a child sex trafficking case and I lose that case, then there's implications for the victim, and a suspect continues to perpetrate, which causes a lot of people not even to try. And so I just saw these themes all over the globe of people saying, I have this dream, but I'm scared to do it. And so I started working with, first on teams and then individually with clients. The book came only last year. It took me 5 years to write it. And it was because, you know, I can't be everywhere, and people were asking for a cheap option to get their hands on the tools. And so I had to battle my own imposter syndrome. But again, I know that that means that there's a good reason why my imposter is coming up. And so I had to ask for help and being held accountable to put it out there. And, you know, it's weird being an author. The feedback is so humbling. You know, the notes I've gotten where people say, I cried so hard. And I'm like, what part?
Nice.
Yeah, I'm like, what part? Because you just never know what's going to resonate, you know?
Right. What is your best advice for people dealing with imposter syndrome?
So having awareness around what imposter syndrome is and how it shows up for you is by far the most powerful thing you can do. Because once you know, you can change it. So if you, like, usually we look at behaviors. So the cognitive triangle in psychology says your thoughts lead to emotions in your body, which lead to behaviors. So I would work backwards. So if you're in a space in life where you're saying things to yourself like, I feel stuck, or like, I've done everything I can and I don't understand why I can't do this thing, that tells me that you have a subconscious imposter thought that's governing that behavior. And it usually is an I am statement. So I had 4, right? So I am too female. I am too young looking. I am too Hispanic. I look much younger than I am. And all of those were part of this bigger imposter statement, which was, I don't matter. So because I look young, because I'm a woman, I don't matter. But the reality is that on the stage, me standing in front of people saying, I was a Pentagon bodyguard. I hunted terrorists. I chased spies. I did crazy things all over the world. And I look like this. So if I can do this, I promise you, you can make your dream happen, and I can show you how. And so just giving people that confidence and the encouragement that, oh, if Alani is the world's tiniest bodyguard, then surely I can start that business or go to school or take that scary leap, right?
How long has the book been out? Is it fairly recent?
It's been almost a year.
Okay, I'm about to get mint leaves stuck on my lip here.
Yum.
Yum, yeah. So what has the reaction been? It sounds like you've gotten a fair amount of feedback. What have you done to market it? That's something authors always want to know.
I know. I'm so honestly so bad because I just have 2 employees. I have 2 employees who are amazing. But in typical justice seeker mode, we're not very good at self-promotion. So the book got published and I was like, I have a book. Like, there was no kind of on-ramp. And so as I get feedback, so people will send me notes or they'll do ratings on Goodreads or on Amazon or wherever. And, obviously I'll share that information or the private messages that I get. I do a lot of public speaking, so I do a lot of keynotes. So obviously I'm selling my book at those events as well. And people share the book a lot. So it's just, the feedback has been incredible. Like I said, it's very weird being an author because like I mean, we all have books that when you're done with them, you just want to hug them and like, I just want them to sink into my heart. You know what I mean? And it's so incredible to feel a connection with somebody who I don't even know that changed my life through their words. So to be on the other end of that is just really crazy. But
so I have to ask, if you're doing public speaking, I'm guessing you've met some of your readers?
I have.
Okay. And do you meet them after they read the book?
About a quarter is after they've read the book. Or I'll be out and about and someone will say, "Oh my gosh, you're Alani." Like
Really? That's so neat.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And so, yeah, just to hear them share about how it impacted them is the best work I've ever done in my life. I mean, hunting terrorists and all that was amazing, but you want to know that you made a difference to somebody, you know? And
yeah, I think that's a very deep-seated desire for all of us to know that we maybe left the world a better place than we found it. You know, I think that's just hardwired into us to want to do that. So which of your favorite authors have you met?
Oh my gosh. You know, to be honest, I don't think I've met any of them in person. I'm pretty shy when it comes to stuff like that, but my favorites are like Colin Powell, of course, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek. Actually, Simon Sinek, I saw him at a conference once and he was amazing, but I didn't speak to him directly. But
so yeah. I'm guessing Colin Powell's book was nonfiction. I'm not surprised he wrote a book, but I actually wasn't. What is it about? Something to do with the military, I'm guessing.
He's actually written quite a few books. So the big one he's famous for is called My American Journey, and it's probably 20 years old.
I think I remember that title.
Right. So it's his journey to becoming the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he gives his like best leadership tips, which are amazing for especially if you're a new leader. And then, but one that really got to me was he wrote a book around 2016, 2017. And you know what? I'm blanking on the name. I have a terrible memory, but it was all about, it included his time as the national security advisor and the Secretary of State. And I got that book in a moment when I felt very lonely and I didn't really have, I had mentors, but like I didn't have that connection and I was really craving a connection. And in this book, he talks about his worst mistake, which was when he went to the United Nations and said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And of course, later it was found out that there were none. And so, you know, he was like, I should have pushed more to verify the intelligence and it's a point of shame for me. And so hearing someone that was that accomplished talk about their biggest failure really encouraged me. And that's when I realized how powerful books were in terms of like when I felt alone, that, you know, they made me feel not alone when I was reading them.
Right. Just kind of a fun story. I had a favorite book when I was, I don't know, 9, 10 years old. It was called In the Keep of Time. And this was back in the 70s. And so I grew up, In the Keep of Time is about 4 siblings who go into a Scottish keep, Smailholm Tower, and they come out in the wrong century. And so those who know my books will see the obvious parallel. Not that I copied her exactly. And in fact, in my story, it's 2 men who switch places. But on one of my research trips to Scotland, my now husband and I went to Smailholm Tower. And I started telling them it's been completely rebuilt inside as compared to how it was in the book, which is how the author Margaret Anderson knew it. And so one of the park staff said, well, will you write to her and ask her if she'll sell her book? And I'm kind of thinking, why me? But then I thought, well, wait a second, this is an opportunity. And so I found out that, you know, something like 40 years later, Margaret was doing great. She had a website. She was reissuing the books. So I sent her a message, and a few days later, I had an answer. And so I ended up getting to actually go out and see her. And it was funny because I tried to act like I was just going to be halfway across the country. And well, you know, if I just happened to be there, you know, could I take you to lunch? And she saw right through it. And so she invited me to lunch at her house, served this beautiful salad from the garden. She's actually been a guest on Books and Brews. So that was really neat.
Oh
And
my
I
gosh.
think that I did meet Diana Gabaldon, but that was more, she and I were both selling books at the same book event. And so I stood in line to say hello to her. I asked her to pose with my book. And so Diana Gabaldon is reading my time travel book, or pretending to, for the pictures. So that was kind of neat.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. So can I ask you a question?
Mhm. Yeah.
So most people with imposter syndrome would not have the guts to reach out to their favorite author and say, hey, can I I'm going to kind of be in the area. What did it take in your head for you to overcome that barrier?
I think I was born in a lot of ways without fears. Maybe we should have. You know, this is a good question, and I think part of it I'm going to attribute to a friend I had in junior high named Ruth. And I kind of don't want to say this publicly. Sometimes Ruth would trip and fall and things like that. And she just had such a good attitude about it. Like, she tripped going up the steps onto the bus once. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would die of embarrassment. And she's like, I'll never see them again. Who cares? And that really helped me, you know, to start saying that in my own life. Okay, what if I write to her and she doesn't answer? So what?
Amazing. I love that. So that reminds me of, you're the average of the people you spend time with. And so you had this very, you know, to you seemed like courageous friend who just didn't care about what other people thought, and that rubbed off on you. Oh, that is beautiful.
Yeah. No, she's quite an amazing person. She's extremely smart, and she now lives in Germany. She's fluent in German, which I kind of envy, because I like to study languages, but I'm not fluent in anything except English. So yeah.
Amazing.
So what's next for you? Do you anticipate writing another book?
I think I will, because the universe keeps conspiring. I keep getting feedback from people that I have to write a second one. The first book was a very difficult childbirth for me, so I am waiting on that a little bit. But I do have my podcast, the Humble Warrior podcast, is coming out this fall.
What's it called? The Humble Warrior?
Humble Warrior podcast. And I'm just so excited because it's me sharing different stories about imposter syndrome, but I also have these amazing guests who really overcame some serious imposter syndrome to put their gifts in service to humanity in such amazing ways. And so I'm just really excited to encourage people through that medium, because I love podcasts.
That's fantastic. Did you have an excerpt prepared to read?
I did. I do.
Fantastic. Let's hear it.
Okay. So, I was trying to maneuver the dust-covered Toyota Hilux as graciously as possible over the numerous speed bumps on the way into the war zone. Although I'd learned how to operate a stick shift years prior, I had never consistently driven one. My poor Terp, the affectionate nickname the military community has given our language interpreters, so graciously biting his tongue in the passenger seat as my driving slowly compressed his spine. As a counterintelligence operative running informants in the Middle East, my job was to obtain intelligence from people who knew the whereabouts of Al-Qaeda's most senior leaders. Some of them were terrorists themselves who had killed Americans before. Part of our work involves seeking new streams of intelligence. And some weeks before this incident, I'd found an opportunity through the equivalent of a 911 call log. An Iraqi had reported information on a pending suicide vest attack. I had presented the raw intelligence to my boss and told him I wanted to meet with this source. My TERP, one of the most decorated and respected special operations linguists in the history of the Iraq campaign, his accolades too classified to discuss in this book, was in agreement with me. My boss shot me down. What? I had an amazing lead that could supply us with new threads of intelligence, and he was telling me no? Why? My TERP and I left the plywood palace that was my boss's office, dejected. After a couple of minutes of silence, my linguist uttered the truth that hung in the air, a truth I was presently rationalizing in my mind. It's because you're a woman. I simultaneously deep-sighed and acknowledged his statement with a nod. And so, weeks later, when we received a second lead on the same stream of intelligence, my TERP and I didn't need to say anything. One look and we were in agreement. We just went. As our bodies jolted uncomfortably over another speed bump, I knew this day was going one of two ways. I was either going to get the intelligence we needed to save lives, or I was getting sent home. The only thing more uncomfortable than the drive off base was the imposter syndrome raging in my head. What if I was wrong? What if this lead was actually an ambush? Who am I to break the rules? Maybe my boss really knew better, and the nagging question about sexism was all in my head. After months of ingesting the best counterintelligence training the world had to offer and learning how to balance risk and reward, it was my chance my intuition was telling me to take. 70% of all humans experience imposter syndrome. This dates back to research first conducted in the 1970s. The typical encounter involves the life-sucking experience of having that voice in your head second-guess your every minute of every day. Even now, the voice rages in my own head. Who do you think you are? Who would pay attention to you? You're going to pour your soul into this book and no one will care. See, I told you. You do not matter. But 20 years into this wild ride of spy and terrorist hunting, being the lead bodyguard to a top Pentagon official, leading a team of bodyguards, overseeing counterintelligence operations for over 200 Air Force units worldwide, and organizing large-scale anti-child sex exploitation operations in the Pacific, I know better now. I know that when my old friend, the imposter, shows up, that I don't need to be scared. When that hopelessness that marks our inner imposter starts to take over my whole body and makes me want to throw up, I smile now, because I felt this feeling many times before.
That's a wonderful reading. How far into your career would you say you overcame this imposter syndrome?
That's a good question.
20 years in?
I was 12 years in. So when like every job I had got progressively crazier. And when I got to the Pentagon bodyguard job was when I was like, okay, I can't hide. You know, before I could fake it till I made it kind of thing. But I was like, there's no way anybody's going to believe I'm the senior bodyguard. And I had a chance encounter with one of the instructors. I very vulnerably kind of word vomited all over him one day. And I was like, what am I doing here? And he looked at me and he said, Alani, your appearance doesn't matter. Bodyguarding is all about how you use your brain to control the physical space. And so 90% of the work is done before you get there. So we do site surveys, we meet with people, we get lists of people who are going to be there. Our intelligence people run those lists to make sure we don't have any bad people there. If we do identify someone, they're not allowed to come to the event. So we control everything that's happening. And so once I did the job and realized, oh, actually, like my imposter has been a liar all these years, that's when things changed. So 12 years.
So I'm curious, how much of a job of being a senior bodyguard is knowing martial arts or weaponry, or is it like 90% mental?
It's 95% mental. Of course, you know, we have different layers of training. And so we had plenty of hand-to-hand combatives in the mat room. We get tons of shooting training. And that's something I often say too, is when people kind of want to challenge my experience, I say, my trigger finger works the same as any man's, you know, 7 pounds per square inch. And so, yeah, it's mostly mental. And obviously with recent events with, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the assassination attempt on President Trump, and the women Secret Service agents have gotten a lot of flack, but those people just really don't understand that when a threat presents, you're not going to have it look like the movies. You're not going to roundhouse kick them, and it's not going to look beautiful. And the instructors don't care. We don't care. The job is you separate that threat from your boss. It's not going to be pretty because you're reacting. And so that's something that, you know, the public in general doesn't know, but yeah. So.
I think that's a great perspective because, yes, of course. Now I've heard comments where they thought, were there 3 women involved in that?
Something like that.
I think it was 3, where 2 of them, they were saying they looked like they did a great job. The third one looked like she was ducking for cover behind Trump. But from your perspective, is that what was happening, or is this where we don't understand because we're not in that?
Right. And that's a really great perspective. And the truth is that unless you're there, or unless you have intimate knowledge of the case, you don't actually know what happened. The other reality is that you don't know how you're going to react under a time of stress until it happens. And so you get in your training, they explain, you know, when a threat presents, you might get tunnel vision. So like all you see is like a pinpoint of light. Your peripheral vision doesn't exist anymore. You know, you have a physiological reaction. One of the issues people commented on was she couldn't find her holster. And, you know, that could be a training issue, but like the fact is your motor skills are deteriorated when a threat like that exists. And so, you know, I don't know what's going on in her head, but that's why we practice and we train. And, you know, some people, when the threat presents is when you discover that maybe this isn't the job for you. And I'm not saying that that's the case with her, but, you know, so I've been in tons of trainings where people that look like they would make great bodyguards are terrified and run the other way. And that's not gender specific. So.
No, I'm sure it's not. No. I have a little bit of a perspective on this because my first husband was, well, he still is a security guard, has been for about 25 years. And he was working in a county hospital where they saw some of the roughest of the rough. And he happened to just be very good at talking to people. He was very good at talking people down. And in fact, one of my sons is a prison guard right now. And as a mother, I wish he weren't. I wish he had a nice, safe desk job. But he seems very happy with it. And he's had some interesting advice from his superiors about, speaking of being a man or being a woman, telling him, you know, as a man, as, you know, one race dealing with another, there are certain things that you have to do because this is how people will respond. And, you know, that's a generality, but his supervisor was saying to him, she was a woman, she said, because I'm a woman, I have to be much tougher and stronger and they'll take it from me. But you as a man, you have to come at this from a very different manner and perspective. So it was fascinating hearing him tell me about the kind of psychology that goes into this.
Oh, 100%. And I love that story for so many reasons, but also because I think one of the things you're getting at between the lines is it requires humility to understand and interact with that psychology to best support the mission. And so that reminds me of when we do interview training or when we go in to do a suspect interview or an interrogation, there's usually 2 of us. So one person is the primary interviewer. The other person's usually taking notes and might ask secondary questions. But if I, as the primary, am noticing that my suspect is not responding to me well because he might have that psychological type that hates women, I have to have the humility to know that my secondary needs to be primary. Right. And we practice and we have that seamless, like, we don't have to talk or do anything. We just know that, okay, now I'm transitioning. I'm going to be secondary. I'm taking notes. You're going to be the primary because he responds better to you. And absolutely, like, these are skills that can be taught, but it sounds like they're very innate for your family members, which is an incredible gift.
Yes. Yeah, I think it is. And I do think my son's a very humble guy. You know, I think
Yeah.
he and believes in the mission and what he's doing and the importance of it. And I think he's someone who also values other people. And I think that's going to carry him far in the work he's doing, because I don't think he's going to go in looking down on these men, but seeing them as this is a person. I don't necessarily know all the details of why they're here.
Right.
But yeah, so I am curious about your comment of wondering if your supervisor didn't want to approve your knowledge because you were a woman. In retrospect, did you think that that was why?
So that's a great question, because I obviously had a filter, right? So my imposter syndrome had that filter that said, you're not respected because you're a woman, you're too small, you're whatever. I have no proof of that. I don't know that for sure. And so that's something that I have to own. And your inner imposter is constantly looking for evidence that it's right. So it's constantly going to be like, see, like, your boss doesn't want you to go, and it's because you're a woman. And I have a habit of, now, granted, in our training, we get tons of training around risk versus reward. So I'm not going to risk my life and go out into a terrorist infested city if I don't think that the reward could greatly benefit the mission. So saving lives, stopping attacks. And this was one of maybe 3 times in my career where I knew in my bones it was the right thing to do. And so that's why my interpreter and I, you know, we kind of just looked at each other and we're like, okay, let's just go. And thankfully it worked out. And I remember my boss called me and, you know, he's like, where are you? And I was like, oh, we just got this information. And you discover in the book later on that there were 3 suicide vest bombers, and special operations went out and neutralized that threat. And he was like, good job. You know, we're going to talk about this, but good job. And so I came back and, you know, he was like, you did good today, but if you do that again, I'm sending you home. And I was like,
the reason I found this interesting is because we live in a society where there's a lot of talk about how women aren't respected. Women are, you know, this, that, and the other. That's not my personal experience. And my main instrument was trombone. So I was in, you know, an orchestral trombone, jazz trombone. So I was living and working in a very male-dominated world. And I virtually never felt disrespected.
That's so great.
I never did. I always felt like if I go in and I can play the music, they're going to ask me back. And there were people that constantly asked me back to play again. The only time that I wasn't asked back, it was very obvious why. He thought that I wasn't playing loud enough. And I'm sure all the trombone players in the world are laughing their butts off right now, because as trombonists, we take pride and we don't do piano.
Right.
So forte, we do forte, fortissimo, and louder. And that's really the only time that I had a complaint. And it was obviously about my playing, that I just, for whatever reason, couldn't get the volume he wanted. And but other than that, you know, and I've seen a woman let go. In fact, before we even got to the program, she came in. I think she got there a little late the first night. She was playing badly. The conductor kept saying, you know, you've got to fix this. And she kept going, you know, this guy scared me when I was walking here, and I'm frazzled, so I can't play well. But I'll be fine next time. He's like, there's no next time. We don't have that kind of time. We need to be ready for the performance. And it was very clearly, you know, she and I were both women, and he kept one of us and sent the other home. And interestingly, I believe the only time I have ever felt that I was treated differently because I'm a woman, both times have been regarding cars. And so when I was single after I divorced for about 10 years, I would take my car in, treat it perfectly, get the oil changed, and they would say, you know, you need this, this, and this done. You need these fluids replaced. One day I went in there and the guy told me, you need this fluid replaced. It's never been done since you've owned the car, and it should have been. And I looked at him, I'm like, I didn't say it, but I knew he was lying because I had done every recommended one always to make sure that
Right.
car. And I was like, thank you. I'm not having that done. I paid him. And I'm not ashamed to say the name. I will never go to Valvoline again, ever.
Mm.
They lied to me and they thought they could do it because, I mean, at least I believe that. And you're right. Maybe I just look stupid or something. And he thought, but the other incident was I used to have a 15-passenger van. And I was trading it in for a smaller Kia Sedona as my kids got bigger or, you know, grew up and left home. And so I took the 15-passenger van to the dealership. They gave me the trade-in price and they ordered my Kia Sedona. And I went back to pick up the Kia Sedona and trade it in. And the manager comes in and he tells me, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were buying a new car. We're giving you less of a trade-in for a new car. And I'm like, to this day, and again, I could be wrong, but I don't believe they would have done that to a man. And luckily, I had done my research. I knew that the exact same Kia Sedona that I wanted was in a different lot. And so I said, bye.
Yeah.
And I drove 50 miles to the other lot. I walked in. This is a funny story. I walked in. I said, you have a red Kia Sedona on your lot. I want it. He's like, you have to take a test drive. I said, I have 7 boys who are growing. I need 3 rows. I need the third one to have enough leg room. The Kia Sedona is the only car I can afford that has what I need. I'm buying this car. He's like, no, you have to take a test drive. I'm like, okay, fine. Can I buy your car now? easiest sale the guy ever made. So I thought that was kind of funny. But, you know, going back to the point, when I'm dealing with cars, that's the only time I've ever felt that they think I'm stupid because I'm a woman. And I'd be curious about your experience, you know,
for sure.
Are there other fields or, you know, other places where you feel more or less respected?
Sure. So I think at first it's important to acknowledge that like these situations that we're talking about, we're making an interpretation, right? I mean, even I, with my Iraq situation, that's what I'm feeling in my chest. And I think there's something to be said about your soul recognizing intent. But I think this is my theory. There's a little bit of a difference in the situations between like the orchestra and the car situations because, and the military is very similar to the car situations where I love the military, but one of our biggest downsides is we and car sales are a zero-sum game. So it's always one party wins, one party loses. And so from the military standpoint, our perspective is we're going to win. You're going to lose. And from a car buying standpoint, I'm going to win by selling you this car. That's the win for me. Or I'm going to win by extracting more money from you, by lying to you and getting you to do this extra service. Whereas the orchestra, it is inherently culturally an entity that has to collaborate to create the mission. And so, because I was in orchestra as well for many years.
What did you play?
The flute and the piccolo. Yes, a little bit of drums, a little percussion. But the core thought around zero-sum game is I win, you lose. But the core thought around orchestra is we all win or we're not going to play. And so, you know, for that one conductor, him seeing the one female, and he's just like, the win is you need to be on it and you're not. And so I got to cut you out. Right. And so, and so I think maybe bigger picture also, what I try to tell people is I'm not saying that sexism and racism and all the biases don't exist. Of course they exist. But what I have learned through my journey and what I talk about in the book is in spite of those biases, I can't control how the world interacts with me, but I can control how I respond to it.
Right.
And that's what the book teaches, is in spite of that bias, this is how you're going to be successful. Because if your life's work is to have a podcast where you're sharing literary works and drinks, right? Or you want to go protect kids, or you want to sell cars or whatever, there's a bigger picture to it. And you get to decide, do I want to play zero sum, or do I want to play a bigger, better game where everybody wins? And so those are the kinds of tools that we teach. And unfortunately, most of the world operates in victim and anger, like control mentality. But that's part of the beauty of books, right? Is you can learn from people and understand different new perspectives and see what's possible because of books. And that's why authors like Colin Powell have had such an impact on me, because I didn't have those examples maybe right in front of me, but having the wisdom from 20 years it's invaluable.
And that's a great message, you know, and I think that's so important, because I agree. Yes, there are going to be people who are sexist, racist, whatever, but it doesn't have to control our lives. I think they're much fewer and farther between than a lot of people think. And I think it can become an excuse. You know, I could say, oh, you know, this conductor is going to hate me, I have no chance. And then I'm off the hook for trying.
Oh,
and
100%.
I don't have to work at it because, oh, well, the world's against me anyway.
Yes. And I'm so glad you said that, because that's actually another key of imposter syndrome, is that it keeps you from taking responsibility for creating the life or career that you want. And so, when I'm a victim, oh, the conductor hates me or whatever, then like, I don't have to get better and I don't have to challenge the status quo, because I already believe that I'm powerless to change my circumstances. And so once you realize that this is something you made up to protect you, then you realize you can make up something else, a different mechanism.
Exactly. Yeah. So where can people find you online?
So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Mighty Sparrow Coaching. I have different materials on different platforms. And so if you aren't sure if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, or if you want a life purpose exercise because your imposter is tied to your life purpose, you can DM me life purpose. I will gladly send you that freebie so you can discover how you can empower yourself on your journey. So
fantastic. What events do you have coming up that people could attend, or do you have any?
Ooh, yes. I am speaking at a small business conference in Billings, Montana, October 18th, I believe. So it's Big Sky EDA. I'll be doing a keynote there. I'll also be speaking at the Montana Lodging and Hospitality Association annual conference on imposter syndrome. That is in Bozeman, Montana, also in October. I have the podcast, Humble Warrior podcast, is coming out this fall. I don't have a date yet, but probably late September, October timeframe. And I also have an end of year freebie event. So I'm actually really excited. We're going to be talking about how imposter syndrome affects your money, your ability to make it, advocate for yourself, to get pay raises, negotiate salaries. And so that's actually listed on my website as well, mightysparrowcoaching.com. All are welcome to attend.
Fantastic. So viewers can find me at booksandbrews.net or lauravosica.com. And I will be at the Nashville, I forget what it's called, but it's in Nashville, and it's a book festival on October 26th and 27th. And Gabriel's Horn Press, who is our official sponsor, is accepting submissions to their poetry anthologies. So you can find them at gabrielshornpress.com/poetry-anthology. So I think that's everything, unless you have any last words you want to say.
No, I mean, just remember, audience, what you think is your weakness is the key to unlocking your greatest power. So don't doubt yourself for 1 second.
Wonderful final words. Cheers.